What manner of terror awaits when a god loses his mind? Not a figurative, quiet madness behind closed temple doors, but a literal, infectious, and violent grief that bleeds into the earth itself, twisting the very trees into monuments of agony. For decades, the Legacy of Kain franchise has been revered as an absolute dark fantasy masterpiece. Today, we turn the heavy, iron-bound pages of the archives to plunge into the 1996 retro classic, Blood Omen Legacy of Kain. Prepare for a deep lore analysis of its psychological horror, its unparalleled environmental storytelling, and a Shakespearean tragedy so profound it rots the ground our anti-hero walks upon.
Welcome to the deep dive in the Onyx Codex.
Yeah, it really is a profoundly heavy, decaying world we are stepping into today. And, examining the architecture of its ruin is going to be a pretty fascinating journey.
Oh, absolutely. I am more than ready to unearth all of this. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to you, sitting right there with us.
Yes, we are so thrilled you're joining us for this incredibly special exploration into the dark, necrotic heart of Nosgoth.
Right, and to truly set the stage for our journey today, we really need to look intimately at the man, or I guess more accurately, the monster at the center of this blood-soaked tapestry.
Kain.
Exactly, Kain. Because to understand the gravity of the world's collapse, you first have to understand the sheer arrogance of our protagonist.
It's so true. I mean, his ego is just off the charts.
It really is. Like, imagine for a moment that you are a nobleman in this world. You have lived your entire life steeped in privilege, wealth, and just, unchecked authority.
You're completely used to the world bending to your every whim.
Right. You snap your fingers and people jump. But then one night you're ambushed by common brigands, murdered in the mud.
And that violation of his perceived sovereignty, that is the crucial starting point here. Kain doesn't view his death merely as a tragedy, right?
No, not at all.
He views it as an unacceptable insult. He's deeply offended that common thieves dared to strike him down.
He's insulted by the class of his murderers.
Exactly. So when he awakens in the underworld, stripped of his titles and his flesh, that bruised ego becomes the main driving force of his resurrection.
Which, of course, brings us to the necromancer, Mortanius. Kain is lingering in this purgatorial state, just burning with the indignity of his murder.
Just seething.
Yeah, seething. And Mortanius offers him a dark pact. He offers Kain the chance to return to the world of the living and enact his vengeance.
And Kain just accepts this offer without a second thought. I mean, he doesn't pause at all.
None. Zero hesitation. He doesn't ask about the cost. He doesn't inquire about the mechanics of this resurrection.
He just heedlessly allows himself to be reborn as a vampire.
Right, which highlights a fatal flaw in Kain's psychology that the narrative will, repeatedly exploit.
His total obsession with immediate visceral gratification.
Yes. He completely ignores the fine print of Mortanius's pact.
He really does. He doesn't consider the eternal consequences of a vampiric curse at all.
The unending thirst, the weakness to sunlight, the forfeiture of his very soul, he just doesn't care.
He simply wants the power to exact vengeance, and he wants it immediately.
And what makes this opening act so compelling is that the narrative actually indulges this power fantasy. It lets him have exactly what he asked for.
Oh, it completely leans into it. He tracks down the assassins who killed him, and it isn't even a contest.
Not even close. The game lets you revel in his newly acquired dark gifts. You literally tear through these brigands with terrifying, effortless brutality.
Yeah, you experience the supernatural strength, the speed, the unmitigated dominance over mortal men firsthand.
It's an incredible rush. For a brief, intoxicating window of time, Kain genuinely believes he has conquered his own death.
He's standing there, totally victorious, convinced he is the apex predator.
The sovereign master of his own fate. But that victory is completely hollow, isn't it?
So hollow. And Mortanius, who has just been, watching from the shadows, immediately shatters Kain's illusion of control.
Right, because the necromancer reveals that these brigands were nothing but pawns.
They were just the blunt instruments of his murder, not the actual architects.
I can only imagine the sheer whiplash Kain experiences in that moment,
Oh, it must have been maddening.
He just sold his soul for revenge, achieved it, and is immediately told, "Congratulations on swatting the flies, Kain, but you missed the puppet masters."
Mortanius just completely pulls the rug out from under him, revealing this massive, shadowy conspiracy.
It's a masterful narrative pivot. It takes a conventional, straightforward revenge plot and immediately expands it into a sprawling, existential mystery.
It really does. Kain is abruptly forced to look beyond his own bloody gratification.
Because the vengeance he sacrificed his humanity for means absolutely nothing now.
Exactly. If he wants the truth behind his assassination, and more importantly, if he wants to find a cure for this vampiric curse he just so blindly accepted.
Which he really wants a cure for now that the honeymoon phase is over.
Right. Mortanius directs him to the geographic and magical center of the world, the Pillars of Nosgoth.
Okay, let's talk about these pillars because they are the defining visual and thematic anchor of the entire franchise.
They absolutely are.
When we hear the word pillars in a fantasy context, we are, conditioned to expect something magnificent.
Right. You expect to walk into a sacred clearing and see breathtaking, pristine marble edifices reaching into the heavens.
Exactly. You expect them to be the ultimate bastion of holy light, radiating protective magic.
And that expectation is completely rooted in what the pillars are supposed to represent in the lore.
They are the health of the land made manifest, right?
Yes. In the lore of Nosgoth, these 9 colossal edifices are not merely ceremonial monuments. They are the spiritual, magical, and physical immune system of the entire world.
Reaching from the deepest tectonic bowels of the earth up into the highest pinnacle of the sky.
Exactly. They govern the fundamental elements of existence: mind, conflict, nature, energy, dimension, time, alchemy, death, and balance.
Wait, I'm struggling to understand the actual mechanics of that. How does a stone pillar act as an immune system?
It's a bit abstract, yeah.
Like, is it just radiating a generic force field, or is there a specific biological or magical process happening here?
So think of it less as a physical wall and more as a localized magical network.
Okay, a network.
Right. The pillars draw raw, untamed energy from the earth, filter it through these specific elemental disciplines, and project an invisible, stabilizing web across Nosgoth.
Oh, I see.
And this web prevents the world from unraveling into chaos or being invaded by dark, extra-dimensional forces.
And this is the critical vulnerability of Nosgoth's design. Right. The pillars are not autonomous.
That's the kicker. They are symbiotically bound to a group of human sorcerers known as the Circle of Nine.
So the human guardians are basically the processors for this magical network.
Precisely. Each sorcerer serves one pillar.
That sounds like a massive single point of failure.
It really is. Their spiritual purity, their mental stability, and their moral integrity dictate the physical state of the stone.
And, by extension, the health of the world itself.
Exactly. The pillars act as a direct physical barometer for the souls of their guardians.
Which makes Kain's arrival at the pillars so incredibly jarring. Because he doesn't find pristine marble.
Far from it.
He arrives at the epicenter of a dying world. The contrast to what you'd expect is just sickening.
It's such a striking image.
These 9 colossal columns are cracked and splintered. They are blackened, oozing with a vile necrotic decay.
The stone is stained with a creeping corruption, weeping this sickly, viscous sap.
It is the architectural equivalent of a rotting corpse.
And it serves as the visual thesis statement for the entire setting. The macrocosm directly reflects the microcosm.
So when Kain looks at these rotting monoliths,
he is looking at the diseased, festering minds of the world's supposed protectors.
The human guardians have become corrupted.
Right, and because of that symbiotic link, their corruption has literally infected the stone.
And by extension, the soil, the water, and the air of Nosgoth.
Exactly. The whole world is sick.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because right in the center of this architectural nightmare, Kain encounters a figure that completely upends his understanding of the world.
Ariel.
Yes, he meets Ariel. And to give you, listening at home, a sense of how deeply unsettling this is, imagine walking into the most prestigious hospital on Earth.
Right.
You are seeking a cure for a terminal, agonizing illness. You finally reach the office of the chief physician, the only person who can save you.
And you find out the doctor is a ghost permanently chained to a bloody operating table.
That paints a remarkably vivid picture of Kain's predicament, doesn't it?
It really does. He arrives seeking salvation from the ultimate authority, only to find that the authority itself has been butchered.
But wait, why is she trapped there? If she was the supreme guardian, how did she end up tethered to the very stone that was supposed to represent her power?
Well, Ariel was the guardian of the Pillar of Balance.
Okay.
She was the central node of the entire Circle of Nine, the unifying force that kept the other disciplines in harmony.
So she was the most important one.
Essentially, yes. But she was brutally assassinated right at the base of her pillar.
Oh, wow.
And because the magic binding a guardian to their pillar is so profound, so deeply entrenched in their soul, her spirit could not pass on.
The bond was just too strong to break even in death.
Exactly. The trauma of her murder and the collapse of the balance pillar shackled her ghost to the physical site of her death.
She is anchored to her own failure and her own gruesome end.
And her visual design reflects that trauma so perfectly. It is a true masterclass in Gothic horror.
It really is. You look at her, and half of her face is that of a stunning, regal, tragic sorceress.
You can clearly see the majestic, ethereal guardian she used to be.
But the other half, it is entirely stripped of flesh. It is a rotting, exposed skull.
It's so unsettling.
And when she speaks, her voice echoes with this haunting dual layer, a blend of ethereal beauty and agonizing, endless torment.
Her appearance is doing immense heavy lifting for the narrative here.
How so?
That half-skull, half-flesh visage is the ultimate metaphorical reflection of Nosgoth itself.
Oh, I see what you mean.
A world that was once beautiful, balanced, and vibrant, now half-consumed by irreversible decay and death.
She is the living embodiment of the world's sickness.
Yes, and she delivers a phenomenally cruel revelation to Kain, completely shattering his arrogant assumptions.
Because Kain, still maintaining his spoiled nobleman attitude, essentially walks up to the ghost of the world's supreme protector and demands a refund on his undead status.
He basically wants to speak to the manager of life and death.
Exactly. He wants a potion, a spell, a quick fix. He expects her to wave her spectral hand and cure his vampirism.
But Ariel makes the reality brutally clear. There is no simple cure.
The sickness infecting the world cannot be fixed with a potion.
Right. The Circle of Nine, these godlike sorcerers sworn to protect reality, have gone violently, irredeemably insane.
The pillars are decaying because the minds of the guardians are decaying.
The corruption is total. They cannot be reasoned with, they cannot be rehabilitated, and they certainly cannot cure a newly resurrected vampire.
So Ariel issues a chilling directive. She basically drafts Kain into a cosmic war.
She really does. She turns this arrogant, self-serving anti-hero into a supernatural hitman.
She hands him a spectral ledger of death. She tells him that the only way to heal the world, and the only way he will ever earn the peace of a cure for his curse, is to hunt down every single corrupted member of the Circle of Nine and exterminate them.
It is a phenomenal escalation of the stakes.
Kain is no longer just avenging his own petty moral murder.
No, he has been tasked with executing the infected immune system of the entire world.
He must murder the gods to save the earth.
And he must return to the pillars with a physical token from each slain guardian, a morbid trophy to cleanse their respective pillar of its corruption.
And Ariel wastes no time pointing him toward his first target. To cleanse the mind of Nosgoth, Kain is instructed to confront the brain.
Right.
He must travel into the frigid, unforgiving wastelands to find Nupraptor, the mental guardian.
What's fascinating here is the underlying cause of this entire global catastrophe.
Yeah, let's get into that.
When we talk about a pantheon of sorcerers going insane, we usually expect a sinister, external influence.
Like a demonic invasion or a forbidden dark ritual.
Exactly, or a slow, creeping seduction by evil forces. But the ruin of Nosgoth stems from an intimately human tragedy.
He was triggered by a shattered heart.
Yes. This is the part that completely recontextualizes the horror of the game.
Because Nupraptor, the mental guardian, wasn't just a colleague of Ariel's. They were deeply, passionately in love.
And it was Nupraptor who discovered Ariel's mutilated corpse after the assassination.
Oh, man. We really must consider the sheer, unbearable magnitude of that trauma in the context of his specific magical discipline.
Right, because Nupraptor is the guardian of the mind. He possesses the most powerful, sensitive, and expansive psychic abilities in existence.
His mind is attuned to the thoughts and emotions of the entire world.
So when he stumbled upon the broken, bloody body of the woman he loved, his despair was not just a private emotional breakdown.
His grief was so absolute, so devastatingly profound, that his mind essentially detonated.
But wait, how does one sorcerer's grief destroy the minds of the other 8?
Right. Shouldn't there be some kind of magical firewall between them?
You'd think so. If they are the ultimate protectors, why would a single emotional collapse take down the entire network?
That brings us back to the symbiotic link we discussed earlier. The Circle of Nine is not just an alliance of independent mages.
They are spiritually and telepathically bound to one another through their shared connection to the pillars.
They are nodes on the same mainframe.
Exactly. Because they are so intimately linked to the same magical reservoir, There is no insulation between their souls.
So when Nupraptor's psyche fractured, the sheer force of his agony unleashed a literal psychic shockwave, a localized telepathic apocalypse.
A wave of pure, concentrated trauma tearing through the astral plane.
Yes. And that shockwave ripped through the unshielded minds of the other 8 guardians.
It was a sensory and emotional overload of catastrophic proportions.
And it shattered their reason simultaneously. Nupraptor's broken heart effectively lobotomized the protectors of the world, infecting them with his inescapable madness.
It is such a brilliant, deeply tragic concept.
It really is. But what elevates Blood Omen from a good story to a masterpiece is that the game doesn't just relegate this tragedy to a cutscene.
No, not at all.
It doesn't just hand you a lore book and say, Nupraptor is sad, go assassinate him.
It forces you to physically navigate through a literal, tangible manifestation of a broken mind.
Which brings us to the geography of grief.
The environmental storytelling in this segment is unparalleled.
It really sets the standard.
As Kain marches toward Nupraptor's retreat, passing through the surrounding village of Vaserbünde, you witness how psychic trauma manipulates physical reality.
The madness isn't contained within Nupraptor's mind.
No, it is highly infectious. It bleeds out of his fortress, seeping into the soil, the flora, and the very atmosphere.
Think about how horrifying that is. You are like walking through an environment that is actively suffering a mental breakdown.
The mechanics of the world warp to reflect his psychological state.
You see it in the color palette first. The sky loses its natural color, bruising into these sickly, unnatural hues of diseased purples and gangrenous greens.
It literally looks like a massive hematoma spreading across the heavens.
And the architecture of the land itself becomes hostile and wrong.
The trees don't follow natural growth patterns anymore.
The ambient magic of the Mental Guardian has twisted their trunks and branches.
They contort in unnatural angles, looking like tortured, grasping fingers clawing desperately at the sky.
And the geometry of the canyons and pathways feels jagged, aggressive, and deeply disorienting.
And it isn't just the landscape either, it's the inhabitants.
Right. As you draw closer to the sanctum, the people and creatures Kain faces become increasingly deranged.
You encounter these eyeless wretches, Nupraptor's mutated servants.
They aren't behaving like standard fantasy guards. They are babbling, screaming, thrashing wildly in the mud.
They have been hollowed out by the ambient psychic noise of their master.
They are direct, physical mirrors of his fractured psyche.
It creates a pervasive, suffocating sense of unease. You are navigating the topography of trauma.
By the time Kain finally breaches the labyrinthine corridors of the inner sanctum, the player has been fully submerged in this atmosphere of despair.
You are completely primed for a confrontation with madness.
But even with all that buildup, the narrative completely subverts your expectations of a boss encounter.
Oh, big time.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when you finally reach the apex of this twisted fortress, you expect a villain.
You are geared up for a fight.
You expect a cackling, arrogant sorcerer throwing fireballs, plotting world domination, monologuing about how he is going to crush this arrogant vampire.
But Nupraptor isn't a dark overlord.
No.
Yeah.
He is a profoundly tragic figure of ultimate self-mutilation.
The visual presentation of Nupraptor is deeply disturbing and incredibly poignant.
When Kain finds him, Nupraptor has been driven completely mad, not just by his own grief, but by the amplified psychic echoes of Nosgoth's suffering.
Remember, the world is decaying, people are dying, and his sensitive mind feels all of it.
To cope with this intolerable sensory and emotional overload, he has taken horrific, desperate measures.
He hasn't just hidden himself away.
He has physically destroyed his connection to the outside world.
He literally took a needle and thick black thread and violently sewed his own eyes and mouth shut.
He blinded himself and silenced himself, desperately trying to block out the agony of a world that he inadvertently broke.
It is a grotesque image, but it connects so deeply to the human experience.
It takes a universal, deeply relatable emotion and amplifies it to a terrifying magical extreme.
If you think about how human grief operates on a mundane level when we experience a profound, devastating loss, our natural instinct is often to retreat.
We pull the curtains down. We turn off our phones.
We don't want to see anyone, and we don't want to speak.
We want to shut out the world, because the world no longer makes sense without the person we lost.
Nupraptor's story takes that urge to isolate and makes it literal and permanent.
The sight of the world, the sound of the world is just too painful to bear, so he violently severs his own senses.
You walk into that room, and he is just sitting there in the dark, isolated in this massive retreat, rocking back and forth, consumed by his own inescapable despair.
He isn't plotting to conquer Nosgoth. He just wants the noise to stop.
It almost makes you pity him.
Even Kain, who is generally devoid of empathy at this point in his journey, notes in his internal monologue that Nupraptor cares for nothing now save his own despair.
Kain recognizes that death would be a mercy.
So, Kain prepares to grant that mercy. He draws his weapon, preparing to execute the grieving Mind Mage and claim his first token for the Pillars.
But in classic Nosgoth fashion, a simple execution is never truly simple.
Never. Just as Kain readies his blade, a massive, terrifying variable crashes into the room, physically inserting itself between the vampire and his prey.
Enter the immovable object.
Exactly. If you, as the player, have spent the last few hours of this journey feeling like an unstoppable force, tearing through bandits, dominating the weak, feeling like the ultimate predator, this new arrival is the brick wall you slam into at full speed.
Nupraptor's sanctum is guarded by Malek, the Paladin of the Seraphan Warrior Order.
To understand the sheer gravity of Malek's presence, we have to pull back and look at the bloody history of the Circle of Nine.
Right. Centuries ago, Malek was a mortal man. He was the guardian of conflict, a title that came with immense martial responsibility.
He served as the sworn physical protector of the Circle, leading the Seraphan, which was an elite monastic order of holy warriors dedicated to eradicating threats to the world's guardians.
But Malek's defining characteristic in the lore is not his martial prowess.
What is it then?
It is his spectacular, monumental failure.
I have to ask, how does the guardian of conflict, the leader of a holy warrior order, fail so catastrophically?
What could possibly overwhelm him?
It was an event that shook the foundations of Nosgoth long before Ariel's time, long before Nupraptor's grief.
An incredibly powerful, ancient vampire assault was launched against the Circle.
This wasn't just a skirmish.
No, it was a bloody, retaliatory vampire crusade. The ancient vampire infiltrated the Seraphan stronghold with terrifying ease and systematically slaughtered 6 of the human guardians.
6 of the 9 godlike sorcerers completely wiped out in one night.
It was a targeted assassination that nearly destroyed the entire immune system of the world.
And Malek, the guardian of conflict, the man sworn by sacred oath to protect these mages with his life, arrived too late to save them.
He survived the encounter, but he was utterly humiliated, his honor shattered, and his purpose rendered a mockery.
He was the shield that broke.
And the surviving members of the Circle, specifically Mortanius, the necromancer, who would later resurrect Kain, were not forgiving.
Mortanius doesn't really seem like the type to offer a mild reprimand.
Definitely not.
So what was the punishment for failing to protect the very pillars of reality?
Mortanius deemed mortal death too lenient a punishment for such a dereliction of duty.
To ensure Malek would never fail again, and to punish him for eternity, Mortanius performed a horrific, agonizing ritual.
He violently ripped Malek's soul from his mortal flesh and fused it directly into his own battle armor.
So he literally turned him into a tin can fueled by eternal guilt.
Essentially, yes. The mechanics of the spell bound his consciousness to the cold steel.
By the time Ariel is murdered centuries later, Malek is no longer a man.
He is a hollow, disembodied ghost, cursed to an eternity of undeath.
He requires no sleep, no food, and feels no physical pain.
He is entirely consumed by his failure, driven solely by a magical directive to protect the very sorcerers who cursed him.
And the tragic irony of his existence is staggering.
It really is.
He failed to protect the Circle when they were sane and noble. Now, he's magically compelled to protect them in death, even when the Circle has gone completely insane and is actively destroying the world.
He is a slave to a corrupted institution.
And this lore is brilliantly integrated into the actual gameplay of the encounter.
When Malek crashes into Nupraptor's chamber, the game systematically strips the player of their power fantasy.
It is such a brilliant subversion. Think about the mechanics up to this point. You are playing as Kain. You survive by draining the blood of your enemies.
You have been running around Nosgoth, feeding on peasants, tearing heavily armed guards to shreds, wielding your dark magic to manipulate the weak.
You feel invincible. You are at the top of the food chain.
But then you step into the ring with Malek.
And your primary mechanic, vampirism, is suddenly rendered completely obsolete.
Exactly, because you cannot drink blood from an empty suit of armor.
Kain lunges in, expecting to feed, expecting to dominate this new challenger, and his claws scrape uselessly against solid, enchanted steel.
There is no flesh to tear, no life force to drain. Malek is entirely immune to Kain's vampiric nature.
He is invulnerable to Kain's current arsenal of physical weapons.
The combat mechanics here are directly translating the lore to the player. Malek isn't just a difficult boss.
He's fundamentally incompatible with your current power set.
While Kain's attacks bounce off his armor, Malek hits back with devastating, massive halberd strikes that take off huge chunks of Kain's health.
The enchanted halberd sweeps through the arena, and every hit is a brutal reminder of Kain's inadequacy.
It creates a profound, panic-inducing sense of helplessness.
You are forced to realize that raw power, brutality, and sharp fangs are not enough to solve the puzzle of Nosgoth.
Malek represents the stubborn, unyielding weight of history and consequence.
He is literally empty inside, driven only by an archaic, immovable directive.
You can't intimidate a ghost. You can't reason with an automaton of guilt.
And at this stage in the journey, you simply cannot kill him.
It is the ultimate stalemate.
Kain, this arrogant nobleman who believed he could just carve his way through the world to earn a cure, is severely humbled.
He is forced to abandon his ego, turn tail, and run.
He has to use his magic and agility not to fight, but to literally dodge and weave around the paladin, desperately seeking an opening to complete his actual mission.
It becomes a frantic game of cat and mouse.
Kain manages to slip past the towering paladin just long enough to reach the weeping, blinded Nupraptor.
With a swift, brutal strike, Kain severs the Mind Mage's head.
A necessary, gruesome task. He must claim the head as a physical token, incontrovertible proof of the Mental Guardian's death, to cleanse the first pillar.
It's grisly proof of the deed, but it is by no means a clean victory.
No, definitely not. Kain secures the token, and the magic of the sanctum begins to collapse with the death of its master.
But Malek survives.
The living armor escapes the crumbling fortress. Kain stands there, holding the severed head of a tragic lover, realizing that this massive, unkillable threat is still out there in the world.
Malek remains a looming, incredibly dangerous piece on the board, an obstacle that cannot be overcome with mere fangs and physical dominance.
Right. It forces Kain to completely rethink his entire approach to this crusade.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it presents a fascinating, haunting, philosophical dilemma.
I agree, it really leaves you thinking.
Consider the profound irony of Nosgoth's foundational design. The Pillars were created by an ancient race to be the ultimate immune system protecting the world.
They were meant to be an infallible magical barrier against decay, corruption, and dark intrusion.
But because they are intimately, inextricably tied to the fragile, emotional, unpredictable minds of human beings, a single broken heart was enough to turn the world's greatest defense into its deadliest poison.
Is it possible that any system built on flawless perfection is doomed the moment a single human element experiences grief?
That is the big question.
Kain returns to the Pillars and offers Nupraptor's severed head to the ghost of Ariel, restoring the first of the 9 columns. He's taken his first life as the executioner of the gods. But the unkillable Paladin Malek proved that raw vampiric power and a sharp blade are not enough to cleanse this world. To defeat an enemy without a body, Kain needs knowledge that transcends conventional warfare. When we turn the pages of the Codex next, Kain will seek out a master of prophecies. He will travel into the icy mountains to find the Oracle of Nosgoth, stepping blindly into the web of the most dangerous deceptive manipulator in the entire franchise. Until next time, watch your step, stay out of the light, and remember, the archives never close.